You want to dive into the stories and myths behind Professor Scienza's new series, but Italian isn't your thing. No problem. You find all the conversation translated in English in the new Mama Jumbo Shrimp book, an Italian wine pilgrimage with Professor Attilio Scienza. Now available in English on Amazon.
Welcome to this special Clubhouse session of the Italian Wine Podcast. Listen in as members of the Italian wine community engage in fascinating conversations about contemporary wine topics. If you enjoyed the show, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. And remember to subscribe and rate the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your pods.
Hi everyone, this is Beatrice welcoming you to the Italian Wine Clubhouse Ambassadors Corner, one of the top-ranked shows on Italian Wine Podcast. Here, our ambassadors get the mic to interview their favorite producers with total freedom. And if you miss it live, no worries. It's all recorded and dropped later on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today, guest host is Mihai Popescu. Mihai is a Canadian-based wine expert specialized in helping producers enter and succeed in the Canadian market. Today, he's gonna interview Daniel Fabbro from San Polino, Montalcino. So, hi Mihai, hi Daniel, how you doing, guys?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Looking forward for this interview. And thank you, Daniel, for your time.
I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Mihai, are you ready for our ritual question?
Of course, I'm looking forward.
How did you meet Daniel and San Polino Montalcino?
I had the opportunity and I can say the privilege to be invited to Benvenuto Brunello. It's part of the VIA program. And during those days in Montalcino, we get invited to dinners at night. And I had the chance to meet Daniel, his mother, Katia, and his brother, Giulio, during the visit. And we spent the night together at their winery to eat the local food, drink their wines, and discuss wines. So that's when I saw how passionate they are for regenerative winemaking and biodynamics and all this style of viticulture. And also, not because they make these natural wines, their Brunello is not good. They produce exceptional quality wines. So I thought it would be a great idea for this interview, for this conversation, because he has so many feedbacks and intel on this type of winemaking.
Wonderful. Mihai, I'm turning over the floor to you. Have a nice interview, guys.
Thank you, Daniel, for your time. And it was such a pleasure to meet you in Montalcino, and the nice dinner we had with you and the family, with your brother and your mother, Katia, and to share that special moment. It was such a cozy vibe. Your cooking was delicious. And obviously, the wines impressed me a lot, but also the type of viticulture and everything you apply in the vineyard. So my first question is, can you briefly introduce San Polino, where's the estate located in Montalcino, the production, and what makes your terroir unique?
So, my name, of course, is Daniel Fabbro, and I'm one of the family members of San Polino. So I grew up in San Polino ever since I was a child. San Polino is located just southeast of Montalcino, around 5 kilometers at an elevation of around 400 to 450 meters, quite high. We currently work around 8 hectares of vineyard and also maintain around 20 hectares of forest around the estate. Winery, I suppose, is one of the pioneers in Montalcino of sustainable agriculture and of a terroir-focused winemaking.
And you also have regenerative practices. And are you certified organic at this moment, or any other certifications?
So, yes, we're certified organic. In fact, historically, I believe we were, in fact, the first to be certified organic in Montalcino. This is since 1994. We are also part of biodynamic groups and have a biodynamic certification. And we are currently applying for a regenerative certification, even though we've been doing regenerative agriculture for a number of years.
That's very interesting to hear. And we would like to know, when did your passion for wine and regenerative winemaking winery management begin, and what's your personal background?
So I'm a biologist, even though I never worked strictly as a biologist. That's my university degree. And I was specialized in ecology and biodiversity. So ecology is the study of how populations within an ecosystem behave, essentially. And so within the wine world, I feel like I'm continuing a philosophy that very much makes sense to me, which was a philosophy that was actually started by my parents. I suppose the difference is that when my parents had it as a philosophy, it was probably a very idea-based concept, so to speak. Right now, we're feeling great pressure, environmental pressure. We know that we need to have some sort of action to deal with climate change and environmental issues. So right now, we feel it's very necessary, not just from an idea point of view, but also in a practical sense, to follow this philosophy.
To continue on this topic, for the people that or listeners that are not familiar with this concept, can you briefly describe what's regenerative viticulture and some of the practices you implemented at San Polino?
So, regenerative viticulture is, well, it's still a somewhat vague concept. But right now, there are a number of associations which are really trying to create a certification protocol. The trouble is that what you're trying to do with regenerative agriculture is you're trying to improve the environment of your field. You're trying to have a net positive effect on the environment through your farm. So one of the main things would be the increase of biodiversity and the decrease of erosion and the increase of nutrient cycling. So these are all things that regenerative farming focuses on.
And at San Polino, I know we talked, maybe if you would like to tell us about how you reintroduced some spider species that were extinct in the area and how it affected after the vineyard, and if you had other implementation of this type of viticulture, feel free to tell us.
Okay, so this is a very key concept of how we work. So I'll start by talking about the idea of biodiversity. So biodiversity is the different number of species there are, but also the different number of things that these species do, how much variation there is within species. It's just a measure of how diverse your ecosystem is. So why you need a diverse ecosystem? You need it because the more variability and the more specialists you have within an ecosystem, the less fragile it becomes, or the stronger it becomes. Different species, they act as support pillars, as columns for the ecosystem. So if you have many of them, the ecosystem will be more stable. Now, within this reasoning, we think of disease. So notably for us, disease would be mildews, so fungus diseases. We see them as part of the ecosystem. So we don't see them necessarily as enemies. We see them as enemies when they go out of balance, when they can dominate. What we're trying to do, we're trying to create an ecosystem where the dominance of pathogens is discouraged. And we discourage it by making sure that positive organisms can outcompete the negative organisms. So within the specific example you gave, the one of the spiders, this is a very good example because we had a very big issue with pest, a small spider, which was affecting the quality of the grapes. We decided not to use chemical warfare, and we were limited anyway because we were organic, so we didn't know what to do. And we studied with the University of Siena, and with their help, we reintroduced a spider which was extinct because of the use of powdered sulfur in the vineyard. We reintroduced this spider, and this spider started eating the small spiders, and the problem was solved within weeks. So this is a very good example of how a richness of biodiversity is actually very often the solution.
It's very interesting to hear because nowadays we're only focused more and more on health-wise, what we consume, and these practices should be talked more to the consumer and to the wine lovers, because this is what would encourage and would differentiate you on the market compared to more industrial products. So continuing on this, my next question is do you see often there is a relationship within vineyard health, soil life, and the yeast populations that develop on the grape skin. In your experience, how they are connected and how do they influence fermentation and how does it express in the wine? Because I remember you mentioned you don't add yeast, and some of the indigenous yeast from your grapes can resist higher alcohol degree fermentations.
Yes, this is a very interesting question. I think what we're doing, we are going against what would be considered an industrial idea of making a perfect product. So within an industrial idea of making a perfect product, the maker, the manufacturer, needs to have total control over his environment, his factory, his workshop, or his field. And this can make a lot of sense within a factory, but when you try to transfer this logic to agriculture, you suddenly hit a wall, which is a wall made of a huge number of variables. And a very famous variable would be the weather, but there's tiny variables like the lizards, the ants, the specific plants, the pollen, the trees surrounding your fields. So an industrial logic would try to reduce these variables as much as possible. Okay, so the extreme version of this would be, hopefully not modern nowadays, but definitely contemporary. I mean, contemporary agriculture, which would try to eliminate everything from the field except the crop in order to have total control. So I'm not going to go into why I feel this is wrong. I mean, hopefully the listeners will understand that there's something very wrong with trying to eliminate as much life as possible from your field, but this is the industrial logic. With us, what we try to do is do the opposite. So it's step back, not be a control freak, and understand that if you have a lot going on in your field that you don't understand directly, still this will create complexity, it will create an interlocking web, and it will create a healthy environment. Now, when it comes to the yeasts you were talking about, the reason we do spontaneous fermentation, and we do a very strict regime of spontaneous fermentation, every vat ferments by itself. We studied it with a number of universities. Also Harvard was involved, a student from Harvard. We basically found every vat fermenting in an extremely unique way, with dozens of different yeasts, up to 50, 60, 80 different bacteria doing their thing, at least for the first 1 or 2% of alcohol. Now, that complexity, gives wine its bottom layer of texture and complexity, but it also ensures that we won't have crisis during fermentation, because a very varied yeast population will probably lead to balance. If you had less yeast populations, it would probably potentially lead to less balance during the fermentation. It's a very wide question, so I hope that answers it somehow.
Yes, thank you. And maybe just to focus a bit about how they resist to more, like we know the indigenous yeast, sometimes they cannot ferment up to 15 or more % alcohol, even in the high 14%, maybe connected somehow to the health in the vineyard or the practices you're using to create this environment where they can have this healthy species of yeast.
Well, pushing it above 15 is always very risky. I mean, I would never push it above 15 and a half, and ideally we would want to stay below 15 actually for a healthy spontaneous fermentation. This coincides also with my taste in wine, my taste in Brunello. I think Brunello is very good at tolerating high alcohol. In fact, high alcohol is often necessary to compensate for the very fresh acidity or for the very structured tannins. However, my aesthetic is that Brunello should not really be above 15. And our wines, they hover just below 15, 14 and a half. And that we find is the upper limit for safe spontaneous fermentation. We have had fermentations that have gone above 15 and they have worked. So I'm pretty sure that we could safely do it. However, it's not to my aesthetic personal taste. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. However, for sure, having the healthy environment in the field, having this diversity in the field will lead to a very diverse population of yeasts, which will lead to more balanced and less dramatic fermentations. You don't want drama in your winery. You want slow and easy and happy. So that's what a diverse yeast population generally gives you, I believe.
Thank you for clearing it out. And I'm happy you started talking about the wine and your style. How do you perceive all these practices? How do they affect your quality and the wine you guys produce in San Polino? And what's your style, or what do you look into achieving with your wines?
So now I'll tell the listener straight away that Sangiovese is a very difficult grape, okay? And I say that even though Sangiovese is the most grown grape in Italy. If you want to really push Sangiovese and do these long macerations that we do that can last for a month, for 2 months easily, you need to have a grape of perfect balance. And in fact, this balance is only achievable within the area of Montalcino and some other small pockets in Tuscany in the world, I believe. However, as a Sangiovese producer, you are a slave to your terroir. This isn't a Merlot, which, for example, and I love Merlot, but Merlot is very adaptable to different conditions, and the winemaker and the farmer can very much affect its behavior in order to achieve a specific result. With Sangiovese, that is a bit more difficult, meaning that there is an element of luck involved, which is how the vines behave on your terroir. With us, the vines behave very well, I think. We make wines which quite representative of high-altitude Brunellos, so a very strong freshness, very elegant, a potential to be quite austere, very focused fruit. And this is what we find in our vineyard selection. Our standard Brunello, which we also source from lower fields, tends to have a slightly juicier mood. However, I am going to return to this aspect of it, is that a Brunello producer is completely a slave to his terroir. The terroir makes the wine, hopefully, a lot more than the producer does. Ourselves, we try to make the wine entirely in the field. Our view is that you only accumulate mistakes in the winery. You don't improve a wine. The wine has a 100% potential and you never quite achieve it. So the wine really is made in the field. This is our main philosophy, I think.
And to continue with that, I just wanted to have a quick question about the 2011, because it wasn't apparently it wasn't the best vintage, but we tasted together the year 2011, and I find it was, even after 14 years, 15 years almost, it was so complex, and it has had freshness, it had energy. Do you think your practices are better adapted to those styles of vintages, or your vineyard practices can perform better in cooler vintages?
So I think so. I mean, this is one of the reasons. It's not the main reason. It's one of the reasons we're convinced about what we do. We have had great results in terrible years, notably 2014, which was a very wet, very disease-prone year, and we are very convinced with our methods. And in fact, we had a very good harvest. 2011 was the opposite. It was a very, very hot year. And I believe, in theory, that having a very diverse vegetation kept the soil compact, kept the vines healthy. Going back to what I was saying before, there is also the element of luck with Sangiovese. And people don't often mention this. I think maybe people find it distasteful that a good vintage or a good wine from a producer is based on luck. But in 2011, we were quite lucky with some rainfall that very much helped us out. It must be said that the rainfall was helped the vineyard out because there was a lot of vegetation which could absorb the moisture. It wasn't arid. An arid field would have let the rainwater flow off the field and not irrigate. We had a lot of vegetation because of our methods, so the rain was able to soak into the soil and give us the solution for the year to make a fresh wine, even in a hot year. So I suppose, yes, I think that our methods were a key aspect in our resilience in bad years. Absolutely.
Continuing on this concept, talking about resilience, do you think your practices and talking about the vegetation that helps absorb water better in the soils, do you think this your vineyard is better prepared to climate change, to changing always to extreme weather conditions and warmer vintages?
There's one very interesting thing about Italy and climate change. So whenever it comes out, there's I'm not sure how often, every 2 years, 3 years. Anyway, the United Nations releases their report on climate change, which is always a very fascinating and very tragic read. I'd recommend anyone to look into it because it's very eye-opening. There are certain parts of the world which have a very high certainty of what is going to happen. If you go to Florida, we are pretty sure that it's going to be underwater, or big parts of it are going to be underwater in 100 years, and so on. With Italy, there is a huge uncertainty. Is it going to rain more? Will it be tropical? Will it be desertic? We actually don't know. So what we're trying to do, we're just trying to increase resilience. The biodiversity aspect of it helps with resilience, both in hot weather and cold weather and dry weather and wet weather. So that's one of the main things we're trying to do. We are exploring some very interesting techniques. We were, I believe, one of the first winemakers in Montalcino to be doing agroforestry with Brunello. So we have included trees within the vineyard. We're planning ahead. Perhaps we're going to have a very hot year soon. I mean, maybe climate change will hit us that way. But having trees in the field, for example, gives you a number of amazing advantages. It can give you shading if you want, if you prune it a certain way. It shares fungal networks with the vineyard. The new science that's coming out of these ideas is just amazing. And we can go into that if you want. It increases biodiversity. It stops erosion. And these are all key aspects of climate change: biodiversity loss, erosion, desertification. These are key aspects for agriculture. And we're trying to deal with all of them by having a rich ecosystem and by increasing resilience in many different forms within the fields.
That's very interesting to hear and shows how much care you put into the vineyard and all the work you make. And I'm thinking of the younger generations today. They're also put more care into their body and their health, and they try to consume better and better products. And how do you communicate with the younger generation? Is it easy to communicate your practices? I think because your wines are at very high quality. We know you win medals and points and you score it around. But how do you communicate with this younger generation? I think it's very important to have this open communication with them, to explain what you're doing in the winery. Then probably I feel there will be a great connection between the wines and this newer generation.
I'm seeing a lot of interest from the younger generation. It's a very interesting question. We've had long conversations about this. I know that younger people are spending easily as much money as we used to spend on alcohol, but they're drinking less. So the basic equation means that they're spending more for less. I believe that the younger generation doesn't necessarily trust central authorities like, the number one sommelier of the world. I believe that they have their own specific influences. I mean, influencers as well as other things, but that they receive their information from many different sources, and they're quite independent in trying to figure out who is reputable and who is not. So with that in mind, communicating to them, I think they're generally very interested, and they don't like to be told truths like, Mr. So-and-so says this is the best wine. They like to hear that news from somebody they trust and not from an authority. They don't accept authority blindly, which is a big change in the wine world, because up to 10 years ago, consumers accepted authority blindly when it came to assessing a wine or declaring a wine to be good or bad. Environmentally, I still have to understand. I think like everybody's slightly desperate and cynical about what's going on, and also wants to be part of the change. So I think definitely there's a movement towards environmental awareness and terroir and stuff that distances wine from a purely industrial product.
And I think it's interesting because it's all this natural wine movement, and younger generations like to try these wines, but sometimes they avoid Brunello because they think it's not made in that way, but natural wines. And this is, I think, a concept like they misunderstand whatever you're doing in the wine area. Then your interventions are very, very, very careful and precise. So I think this should be communicated even more with them, to especially if they're ready to spend more money on a bottle. And for the last question, when somebody opens a bottle of San Polino, what, even now or in the future, or like they celebrate a while, what do you hope they will experience or feel? Where do you think their emotions will take them, or the wine will make them feel? Because it's also, we tend to describe too many aromas and structure, but sometimes wine is just a vibe.
Well, younger wines, I feel, have the magic, and specifically with varietals like Sangiovese. And there are other varietals that behave the same. Famously, you could say Pinot Noir behaves similarly, that they are super sensitive to terroir. So with a young wine, a young Brunello, I'm tasting the terroir and I'm experiencing the effect that the environment had on the grape and how it's producing all this beauty in the glass. As time goes by, the terroir aspects maybe become a bit more subtle. They become more replaced by aging notes. But in that sense, it becomes like a time capsule. I'm always very emotional, isn't the right word, but there's a strong emotion attached to opening a bottle which has been waiting for you for all these years, because it's like breathing air from the past. It's a bit like a time machine somehow, right? So that there's some real magic in a wine that can give you that. So I hope that, yes, that they will open the bottle and they will think of distant year in which the wine was produced and how the environment and the climate all contributed, and the winemaker obviously all contributed to making this product, and like a time capsule. So that's what I'd like.
Thank you so much for this explanation. It not only makes you travel to a specific place, but also a specific place in time. So I find this type of experiences are magical, especially with Brunellos that can age so long and we can cellar them. And after a few years or many, many years, we can open them and still travel in time and place. Thank you so much for today's interview. I hope for the listeners, they gives them more the taste to learn a bit more about what these practices.
Thank you, Mihai, and thank you for having me, and thank you for asking me all these amazing questions. And I hope I answered them to the satisfaction of the listeners. Of course, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they can feel free to get in touch and to ask me anything that they like about what we were talking about. I would love that.
Thank you so much, Mihai and Daniel. That was such a nice interview, guys. It was amazing. For those who are interested to participate, just send us a DM through our Instagram or mail our Italian Wine Podcast producers at info@italianwinepodcast.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. And thank you so much again, Mihai and Daniel. And this is a wrap from Italian Wine Podcast. Ciao, ciao!
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through italianwinepodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.